My goal is to kind of get introduced, find out a little bit more about you, and then speak more to the mission of your online movement, which I really love.
Oh, thank you.
So Father Paul, tell me, where are you from originally, and what brought you to Philadelphia?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I grew up in a little town right outside New York City, in Bergen County, New Jersey. So you could see like the Empire State Building from my parents' house, right? And so I grew up at our cathedral that's in Passaic, New Jersey, and then in what was it? So I grew up there, and then in 2016, I ended up going to seminary to go into priestly formation, and then I finished formation in 2020, was ordained, and then was assigned to a parish in Levittown, Pennsylvania, which is right outside of Philadelphia, maybe about. It's 20 miles, but 45 minutes, the city story.
Yes. Yeah. Classic urban living. And what seminary did you go to, and where was that?
I went to the Greek Catholic Seminary of St. Cyril and Methodius in Pittsburgh. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. It's so funny. I was raised Greek Orthodox, and in my mind, there's sort of Roman Catholicism and there's Orthodox Christianity. But then when I went to medical school up in Scranton, I have never seen so many combinations of Orthodox Catholic something like Byzantine, Eastern, right? I mean, I had no idea that those mixes existed. And then I started to peel back that history and realizing as territories changed, borders changed throughout centuries, Russia has influence, West has influence, etc. I guess you end up getting these various groups. But can you speak to that at all? Because it sounds to me like you have a one way or another. If you tell me if I'm wrong, I'm just guessing, but it sounds like you commemorate the Roman Catholic Pope, but you have a lot of the Eastern Orthodox sort of traditions on sort of a daily basis. Tell me about that.
Yeah, right. So this is a very confusing thing, and various groups of not to make it like a polemical thing, but various groups have various types of feelings about us. So what happened was, I'll try to make a very, very long 500-year story as short as possible so we can get to the so what the story is so my grandparents are from so we are ethnically Carpatho-Rusin, so that we come from the Carpathian Mountains, but specifically the western side on what would be modern day Slovakia.
Okay.
But we are not Slovak. We consider ourselves Rusin, which is an ethnic minority within the Slovak and Ukrainian peoples, and it straddles the political border of Slovakia and Ukraine.
I imagine.
Right. And so that's always been a contested border for, eons, right? Going back to, like you're saying, with the Kievan Rus Empire, right? And so what happened there over the centuries, it's all isolated mountain stuff, right? And so we were living there. We got evangelized by Cyril Methodius and their disciples in like the 890s, right? So this is when the church was still like the church, right?
Yeah, that's when they came to Hagia Sophia, and they knew not if they were in heaven and earth, correct?
Correct. Yeah, all around that same time. Yeah, when Prince Vladimir sent his legates down and all of that, right? So we got evangelized, and we accepted, Christianity, which, at that time was simply Orthodox Christianity,
right?
As separated from like heretical movements, right? So we accepted Orthodox Christianity, and then centuries go by, and our isolated people are just there doing their thing, pretty much untouched by any type of East-West schism that was going on, right? Like, we really didn't, like, our bishops never acknowledged anything within the mutual excommunications, because it was like we were separated from that, but also we viewed that as like it was a man excommunicating a man. Like, nobody ever really, like, there was no official doctrinal thing, but also we really, for lack of a better word, didn't care. It was just we're practicing Christianity the way we received it. And then in the late 15th and early it's 15th and 16th and 17th century, the Austro-Hungarian Empire starts to form. Okay. And then there's our people all of a sudden come under the rule of the Habsburg family.
Hmm.
and they in our region they put in basically a feudal agricultural system, and our people came under the feudal lords of local landowners,
Hmm.
right? So we were under their lordship. But now the thing with that was the Roman Catholic clergy were designated as clergy, but the Orthodox clergy were not recognized as clergy. So
Okay.
our priests, literally our priests, our bishops, everybody were looked at to be serfs, and they were working in this feudal system. And some of our bishops got together, and like a couple of the priests, a few of the priests, and like one of the bishops got together, and they were like, "Wait a minute, hold on, what's different between us? Like, we still say the Bishop of Rome is the Bishop of Rome, right? We wouldn't necessarily call him like the Pope, but we say, the Bishop of Rome is still the Bishop of Rome. Why are these guys getting to eat and have food and houses, and we're here being slaves?
Yeah.
Let's put something on paper to make it official, even though we already do all this stuff." And so the original, what can be referred to as the Unia agreements, which now is considered by most to be a pejorative term to refer to somebody as a uniate. It's almost like a slur, like a religious slur, right? But the Unia agreements, where we reunited with a bishop that we never ununited with, right? Was just basically a formality of saying, okay, you guys recognize the Bishop of Rome to be the Bishop of Rome, and you can keep all of your quote Orthodox practices. So you can keep, your liturgical expression will be unchanged, your sacramental expression will be unchanged. Everything is unchanged except for the fact that you are commemorating the Bishop of Rome.
Father Paul, let me ask you this, just so I can connect better and relate it to maybe my point of reference. So maybe a few quick questions. Do you give communion out of a cup, or do you give a wafer?
No, it's the leavened bread, commingled in chalice, body and blood.
Okay.
In one chalice with we use the metal spoon.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So
interesting. Again, I'm just because you look like an Orthodox priest. You sound like an Orthodox priest, and I'm just checking a few things. Can your priest marry?
Yes, I am married, and I have two children. Yes.
Okay. Wow. All right. And then it looks like you're wearing a rasa. I've seen crosses of various forms. It looks certainly very Eastern.
Yes, I will do this too, just so you can see. It's the cross of St. Andrew,
right?
Yeah.
No, great. And it's so fascinating to me. I mean, again, I know that we live in the United States, and there's this opportunity for people to declare themselves any form or fashion of religion in general. And there's a lot of Christian denominations. As I mentioned before, when you go to northeastern Pennsylvania and you go to Scranton, it's incredible to see the variety of labels. I don't know how else to describe them. I mean, they're obviously Christian. They obviously sort of reference sort of that ancient apostolic lineage, but it's a mixture of words: Byzantine, Catholic, Eastern Rite, Western Rite, Latin, this and that. And so, from my simplistic sort of Greek Orthodox eyes. And again, I don't want to put my head in the sand to the complexities of history. Like you said, I mean, depending on what war was going on or battle, etc. And all the while, these are Christian peoples fighting, which is the biggest, saddest piece of it all.
Right.
Things get a little confused. And then what's so bad about many of these little sort of micro traditions anyway? Okay, interesting. So Father Paul, then let me ask you this: tell me what, as you create your channel and building Athos, tell me, in terms of your connection to Athos, is there a monastery there that is associated with your, let's call it, division of Orthodoxy or Catholicism? How do you want me to describe that? Actually, again, I'm just more feeling out than anything.
Sure, of course. Obviously, I mean, you could refer to it as like Greek Catholicism, I guess. We'll call it like Catholicism, because how we view the idea of Catholic is that the universal church is comprised of everybody always thinks it's like, the Roman Catholics, and then like there's some fringe groups, right? But the true belief is that the universal church is comprised of the Western. There's one Western church, but there's 23 individual self-governing Eastern churches that comprise the universal or Catholic church, right? So that's how we view it. But then also depending on, there are certain levels of intercommunion with Orthodox jurisdictions, depending on what the jurisdiction is and what the relationship is there between hierarchs and all that kind of stuff. So it's really, there's no hard line in the sand for us, which makes us such an oddity, right? It makes it really hard for us to explain. And it sounds like almost like we don't know who we are, but it's just our identity is so complex that it's really hard to explain. And like for me personally, having grown up as a Ruthenian Greek Catholic, ethnically tied to a family that escaped communism, you know, in the Eastern Bloc and all of this stuff, for me, my experience is really unique nowadays because we see so many people who are like, quote unquote, like converting to Greek Catholicism or Byzantine Catholicism. But then we have all these weird, I'm kind of like diverging here, but then there were several schisms within our church in the early, like late 19th, early 20th century in America specifically. And this is where you get a majority of the people who were OCA originally came from us. And same with the ACROD, the American Carpatho-Russian Orthodox Diocese.
Yes.
They came from us too. And so that's also very weird. And those are all the people you'd see up in Scranton, and all these churches are within walking distance of one another, because like where I was going to church for a while, I mean, we had our cathedral, but then there was another church around the corner that was Russian Patriarchal Orthodox. They came from us and around the corner, but we always joke, being a Greek Catholic, there's always two churches in your town, the church you go to and the church you explicitly don't go to. It's because of these scars of these schisms. It's a generational thing. And it's strange. But so
to what extent do you think those divisions in the 19th and 20th centuries were a consequence of living in America, where that's even possible, versus living somewhere else like in historic Eastern Bloc Europe or Russia, where they just lay down the hammer? I mean, it's so funny. Like, religious tolerance is in some ways such a new concept. And as much as times, like as Christians, and again, I don't even know where I fall on this, but I'm just referencing as a phenomenon. Like, in some ways as a Christian, I want to say, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're not tolerating X, Y, and Z. But then when you look at history and what Christian churches did, like if we're going to say that there was religious tolerance in the early parts of the church, I mean, at some point, depending on the empire, it seems like they tolerated things, and then sometimes they would just throw you in prison. I mean, I guess I'm just, I'm not really sure what really the historical norm is in that regard, but it seems like we get away with a lot in the U.S., and maybe that just continues to, in my mind, complicate things, because now there's a million more different groups, not a million more, but
No, I know what you mean. Absolutely. But yeah, no, this is a specifically, for us, it's a specifically American problem. And I say this, this might sound like a ridiculous thing to say, but you're right. For our bishops and priests who were under communism from the Soviet Union, it was a simple solution. You either got sent to Siberia or were murdered. That's it. Those were the two options. I mean, that was it, right?
Yeah.
So that was it. But here in the United States, when our people started immigrating in like the 1890s, we showed up and we were saying, we're Greco-Catholicnik, right? Greek Catholic, right? So all of a sudden, the Western bishops were like, wait, what do you mean? They look Orthodox. They have beards. They smell Orthodox. They have married priests and they commune infants. This is going to be a scandal to our people. This is terrible. So for a long time, from the years there was a whole thing with this. And we have, I'm sure being Orthodox, you've heard of Alexis Toth, I'm sure, of Wilkes-Barre. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yes, actually. Yes, I was aware.
Yeah, exactly. So he was the one who, what happened was he went, ironically enough, the bishop's name was Bishop Ireland, and he was an Irish Roman Catholic bishop. He came to this country and essentially was like, I want to be a priest here. And the bishop was like, no, you cannot be a priest because you were married and his wife was since deceased and all this. So they got in a big argument, and that's when Alexis Toth left and went with the formed and helped to create what would be the OCA, the Orthodox Church of America. And he took, like, over a course of years, like 200,000 of our people with him or something like that. It's a ridiculous statistic, right? But so we see in America specifically, there was sort of this, like, basically, I hate to play this card, but it was like a anti-cultural, anti-racist kind of thing, where for our people, it was, okay, if you want to be considered Catholic, right? Which meant basically poor immigrants coming here, you will then be able to eat if you are considered Catholic, right? And our people were considered to be like non-whites and all this stuff. So if you wanted to be accepted into American society and be Catholic, you can't have married priests. You have to shave your beards. You have to take on Latin practices. You have to make sure that you love the Pope, you know, almost more than Jesus himself, and all of those kind of things, right? And so from 1929 to 2015, we see this whole crazy thing where we didn't have married priests for that long.
Oh, okay.
And I was in 2016 when I went to seminary. I was like the first married man from our diocese to go to seminary in almost that long. So it was like crazy. So we have all these scars and these wounds in America that they don't have in Eastern Europe, right? And all of that. And it's this weird dynamic, which is healing, you know, and we are coming sort of, I want to say, like, back into our own, in a certain sense, of rediscovering these traditions. But for me, I was always raised in an extremely traditional household.
No, fair enough. And let me ask you this: if I said I had a friend that was Byzantine Catholic, would you be saying that you are like a different subdivision, or that you call yourself Greek Catholic?
Well, yeah, it's Greek or Byzantine. I mean, they kind of sort of rebranded, but what the Byzantine or Greek means is simply that we follow the Byzantine liturgical rite of Constantinople.
Is Alex from the Voice of Reason? Is he Byzantine Catholic?
Yes, I believe so.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. You know, it's so funny. I mean, again, I think these are all growing pains of, let's call it, you know, apostolic Christianity in America. Like, you know, people coming over from, like you said, Eastern Europe, Russia, parts of the Mediterranean, etc., founding a new land, having all this freedom, a lot more latitude, but at the same time trying to kind of go up the learning curve of assimilation and proselytization. And meanwhile, like, everyone here is called a Christian, but obviously that can mean 30,000 different things last time I checked.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I know even as an Orthodox Christian, within that, let's call it those parameters, you know, there's been massive confusion and growing pains, certainly since communism. And, you know, even like, I don't know if you ever follow the Russian Orthodox Church abroad, but, you know, at one point in time for 50 years or so, they weren't really in communion with most of the other mainstream Orthodox Christians because of concerns of ecumenism and concerns of communism infiltration. But now that's all been healed. And, you know, I look forward to another, you know, so many years where eventually these almost administrative kind of like war unique moments can kind of be sorted out, you know, and we kind of move forward.
Right, absolutely. And that's true. And, like, I mean, we see this right in the Orthodox world, and we see this in the greater, like, Christian world as well, you know. And then that's why, as far as going back to the idea of, like, building Athos and why I chose that name and all this. So my spiritual father is very, very big on Athonite spirituality. And for us, that is our, like, patrimony, right? Those are the things that have been handed to us by the church fathers. And being Eastern Christians, you know, we follow all of those teachings. We really are rooted in the 7 ecumenical councils, and we sort of view, like, a lot of the I shouldn't do the air quotes, but the ecumenical councils that the Western Church says, like, we don't really view that. We view them more as just like they were more local councils, that they didn't apply to us, you know, because it's the Pope. Or, you know, the Pope is not necessarily speaking as, quote unquote, the universal pontiff in all of those situations, right? So we're like, okay, we'll put those aside. And what do we really believe, right? Well, we believe the same as any other type of traditional Orthodox Christians would believe, in the sense that it's about asceticism, and it's about sacrament, and it's about the liturgical life and the grace of the Holy Spirit, and living a life that the apostles led, right? And interpreting that through the church fathers. And that brings us to the idea of sort of just living our lives as a monk would on Mount Athos. And even if you're, and there's a lot of writings by some great writers like Metropolitan Hierotheus Vlachos. He has some great writings about this, where we are all called to like express ourselves in this like angelic life, right? But it looks different if you're a married man or you're a single man, or if you're a monk. We're just called to like these different like states, right? And we still have this general expression of monasticism within our lives. And so for us Eastern Christians, it's very important that we have that. And I think we've lost touch with that. And I think sort of my mission, so to speak, is to bring that back, right? To reinstill that in us, that, even though our name might be a little different because of ecclesiology and how we view ecclesial structures, ultimately, this is how we are called to live our lives.
What's funny? And so let me know what you think about this, talking about this idea of asceticism, because I've, like when you don't have a yoke and you are even well-intended, things go wrong. What I mean by that is, as a married person living in the world, trying to be a Christian, like that yoke is important. Like it's a form of asceticism. Waking up in the middle of the night with your kids is a form of asceticism. Right. Feeding them, taking care of them. I mean, in some ways, when Christ tells us to take care of our neighbor, like that also includes our children and family. When I bring a glass of water to someone down the street, like maybe it's a little bit more dramatic, but I also think I get a little bit of heavenly credit every time I feed my own child. And actually, you can see how detrimental it is, like in America, when people don't respect the family and they have broken families and they don't take care of their each other and their grandmothers, for that matter. And I'm an ER doc, so I see the result all the time.
Oh, sure.
When patients are not taking care of their own loved ones, let alone their neighbor. And so, but then at the same time, monks themselves are taking on these, let's call it extra ascetical practices to kind of really fill in that gap that maybe a crying child would provide, a wife would provide, a spouse would provide. I guess my question for you is, if you're a celibate priest and you're neither a monk nor a married man, I know that in some ways you could just fill your schedule and be the ultimate community leader. That makes sense to me. But I also see that if you don't really still take on the practice of asceticism within that celibacy, I just wonder if that is a recipe for, I don't know, just getting a little, I don't know if lazy is the right word or what, but it doesn't sound like a natural state. It really seems prone to me to problem. And as a married priest, and obviously I understand that you have your community and your church and your family, but have you sort of being this hybrid between East and West, do you have a preference as to where you think asceticism kind of strikes the right balance in these different roles within the church?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I see though too with celibacy, and this is, I might take heat for some of the stuff I'm saying today, but I'm just going to say it anyway. But like with celibacy, the thing is like celibacy at its core is rooted in monasticism, right? So the celibacy is rooted in community. Yes. Right? And what do we see in the early mid 20th century? All of a sudden, we see a whole bunch of guys who are asked to, or I guess, devote themselves to celibacy, living alone. There's no community anymore. Even if you're, like you said, you could be the ultimate community guy, right? You're out there, you're doing bingo, you're visiting the sick, you're having bazaars, you're doing all these things, right? Everything. You're surrounded by people all day. But then you go back to your home and you're living in a rectory that is supposed to fit 4 other priests, but you're by yourself. You have no semblance of like that in-home communal prayer. And I know some priests who make it a point to do that. They invite other priests over and they get together and they have, prayer in the home, right? And even like you can do it by yourself, but that idea of like, even if you look at monastics, not every monastic is called to live a hermetic life.
Right.
They're not called to live in a cave in a desert for 40 years and come out and then tell you that even though they've been not talking to people for 40 years, they're still a horrible sinner. And then they go back in. Right. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, like not every monk is called to that. Right. Like, so there is a certain level of communal living within the human person that needs to be fed. Right. So I think that's a major issue with like celibate diocesan clergy in the United States. Now, I could be wrong in some instances, but I think that idea of like ascetic spiritual community rooted in the home, almost like the home in and of itself is this little monastery, right? And like it's...
Tell me your thoughts on this. So one of my major theses for fasting for all people is that as we move towards more and more convenience and comfort within civilization, and we get rid of suffering in many different ways, you need something in your life that keeps you raw and sober and challenged. And fasting in some ways is this phenomenal way of creating that feast and famine sort of on a daily basis, even though there are paved roads and there's air conditioning and there's every convenience. And so you can still feel this ascetical sort of environment. It's, although self-inflicted or self-created, it keeps us in a certain way connected with reality. Because if life gets too comfortable, that's not the promise we were given getting kicked out of Genesis. We were given 3 promises. It was pain, it was hard work, and it was death. And in my mind, if God tells us what reality is, and we find ourselves not having pain, not that we are seeking after it, but if we don't have work, and we don't experience, or at least, are around death to some extent. And I think the most sober people I meet work in that space, but something's going to go wrong. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you're a celibate priest and you live in this incredible 21st century where every convenience is provided to you, and even the maybe the bazaar and the bingo and all of that really is still in that environment of 21st century America where things are pretty convenient, aka the air conditioning is 74 degrees all year long, etc. How do you ensure that you stay within reality and have that rawness and strength? And so I guess my guess is that being a celibate priest should probably be, on the statistical average, a very rare thing. You're either, in my mind, you're either a monk with all the asceticism built into your life through that community setting, or you're a married priest who is absolutely surrounded by all sorts of reasons to feel the difficulties and struggles of life from all sides.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing to parse out, but I think you're correct, in the sense that the ecclesial structure of the church at large, both if you want to put the moniker on it, both Catholic and Orthodox, is that married clergy would be the norm, but the celibate clergy would be coming from monasteries, and they were the bishops.
Yes,
right? And that's how that whole structure works. But then we see in the West, specifically coming out of Rome, addressing a specific problem in Germany and Italy in like the 1100s is where all this mandatory clerical celibacy comes from, to solve an issue with bishoprics being purchased by nobility and landowners, and then they would take the church property and leave it to illegitimate sons. None of these guys were real bishops, and also it was a whole corruption thing. And then this mandatory celibacy in the West kind of got shoved in there, and then there it stayed, right? And so I think ultimately what we have to look at, though, is regardless of married or celibate, the answer to this is looking to the church and her infinite wisdom of liturgy, right? And how we live this ascetic life in the sacraments. Because my Baba, my grandmother, right? The equivalent of like a Greek yaya, right? It's like the equivalent. So my Baba, she would always say to me when it came to fasting, and I never understood this until not too long ago, actually. She would always say, when you're fasting, you eat when you eat, you don't eat when you don't eat, and you don't make yourself sick. Right? So like, what did that mean? Like, she always had this weird like Yoda wisdom for me. And what I think what she meant, what I've come to learn, is like the church tells you like when to eat, the church tells you when not to eat, right? And you pray and you follow those things, and it sort of brings you, like you said, like back to the reality of not the fallen world, but the reality of a Christian, right? That we are living like not for this age, but for the age to come, and we can do that here and now. And like the whole precept of the idea that, especially like now during Great Lent, the point of fasting is to bring us back into a state where Adam and Eve were before the fall, right? And to bring us back into that paradise here and now, and starting to try to live the angelic life here on earth. Like the monks would say, the monks live the angelic life on Athos, and we in the world, we who are, I dare I say, fettered by wives and children and car payments and insurance and, school trips and all those things, right? We can't hit that same level of angelic nature that a monk on Athos would or somewhere else. However, we can still strive, right? We can still, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. We can still strive for that in our ascetic practices and bringing it into, and I know you're big on the physiological, like health aspects of all this too. And why not? I mean, look how healthy all the monks are on Athos, right? There's a reason for that. It's this idiorhythmic lifestyle.
There is. And, and again, I know we're kind of, feeling each other out and touching on a lot of topics, and, we can at some point kind of commit to exploring fasting and this amazing Great Lent. But
absolutely,
it is, in my mind, when you have this world that is filled with the three promises of death, work, and suffering, and then you go and find out that fasting is mentioned and spoken about or practiced in the Old and New Testament. I think it's 77 times. It's referenced in some way, shape, or form. And you continue to see that referenced over and over again in the life of Jesus Christ, who, is really the greatest physician of all time. I mean, he's healing people left and right. And through healing them is trying to convince people that when he talks about the spiritual realm, he's legitimate. I'm paraphrasing here, but there's something there. And of course, as we recognize that connection between soul and body, and I think it's so fascinating to me that there's a resurrection of soul and body. I mean, it's not just like, in some ways you grow up thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to be like this hyper ghost or something. I'm going to be flying around, and I've seen my my cartoons, and everything. But but there is this concept that the body is also coming with us, which is wild to me. But as a physician and as an Orthodox Christian, sort of seeing the mixture between that temple of the soul and the soul itself, there is an extraordinary interconnectedness between those two realms when we talk about fasting. And one of the things I try to make an argument for is that while we might consider our center sort of be our brains and all the cerebrum that comes with it, and there's something about that, but another sort of horsepower of a place, the center of gravity, really is our gut. And I as I look at children, as I look at people with different IQs, different strengths, different weaknesses, the one universal that seems to play between all mankind is this digestion, hunger, enteric nervous system, intestinal aspect of ourselves. Like, it's so incredibly core. And as I recognize that anatomically, physiologically, culturally, spiritually, it's no coincidence that God uses those buttons to access the most deep realms of ourself. I'm saying this kind of in hyperbole, but if I can teach a child through fasting, self-control, discipline, patience, how to delay gratification, what will they not have dominion over? Like, what business, what project, what relationship, what aspect of their life would not benefit from them figuring out those things on a visceral level as early as possible? And why wait till they're 25 to show them that? And I don't think that opening up a book, even doing exercise to some extent, even wax on, wax off, like in Karate Kid, I don't think those things strike as core as to the heart as what fasting can be. And so it's interesting that you have this emphasis on Athos, and in fact my book, and what it sort of explores is what is practiced par excellence for fasting in places like Athos, and health benefit seems to come with it.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Because I mean, I've seen some of your, your work and everything, and I'm totally into it because I mean, and you can't extricate the spiritual from the fasting. And I think you've probably seen things where I've sort of like, gotten a little cranky about like the whole fad idea of intermittent fasting versus the true idea of fasting, right? But like, because if you look at like scripture, right? I love the word splachnon, right? Is the Greek word, the Kini Greek word for guts, right? But what do we see this tied to in scripture is deep-seated emotion, right? Whenever we hear, and the word that they use often in older translations is bowels, right? He was moved in his bowels. We hear and all this stuff, how our bowels, but they don't, nowadays we hear that like a bowel movement, but like, but no, what they're in ancient Hebrew and ancient Greek texts, right? That is the seat of deep emotion, like
visceral,
anger, love, right? Visceral, right? And that pulls you up. And now we're doing all this.
Interesting.
So nowadays, we're doing all this research with mental health and the gut-brain connection. And all of that.
The brain access,
and and all of that, and we're finding out all of these amazing things that it seems like the ancients just knew, right? Like we're a species with amnesia. We've forgotten more than we've known. You know what I mean? Like we just, and we're rediscovering all these things on a scientific level. But then we look back to the writings of both the of scripture of the early church fathers, but then also modern ascetics like Elder Sophrony, Elder Paisios, Silouan the Athonite, the late 19th and 20th century people who are living the same apostolic life that monks in the 2nd century, like Anthony the Great, were living in the desert. And there's this unbroken chain. And Elder Sophrony has this beautiful quote where he says, that there is no place, like the universal precepts of Christianity are practicable in all times, in any epoch, in any generation. And there's not any excuse in the world that we cannot be living these things at any given point in human history, and that's what we find on Athos. We find these guys doing that. And that should be our inspiration. I mean, they're going back to the core of what it means to be a Christian, period.
Well said. And I really have to keep that in mind next time I read Old and New Testament. I do that regularly for this reference about that sort of visceral feeling and how it's communicated through that bowel phrase, which you're absolutely right. And there's no coincidence. And so it's just interesting, again, like while we understand the mechanism in 21st century, the commandment from Christ was 2,000 years ago, prayer and fast. And when you find out that he even tells the apostles they can't, heal this epileptic unless it's through prayer and fasting. Of course, Christ takes care of it right away. When Dr. Conklin 100 years ago reads that New Testament passage and says, "Hey, I know 20 epileptic children. Let's do it." He has them fast, nothing but vitamins and water for like 2 weeks. All the seizures go away. And it's not to say, and this is always part of the discussion, it's like, well, Pete, are you just promoting a whole bunch of biohacks? And I'm not at all. No. I'm just trying to remind the hundreds of millions of Christians out there that we are really self-exiling ourselves from the cure of 90%. I'm not even exaggerating. 90% of all disease is entirely preventable. And as far as I can tell, the practice of fasting is the way to solve that. Never mind the fact that if you do it in this Christian practice, which as you mentioned, I'm referencing things from Saint Epiphanius about fasting practices of intermittent fasting in particular. And as the monks of Mount Athos, don't eat to the 9th hour because Jesus died on the 9th hour and fasted till the 9th hour, or they fast till communion. But by the way, Father, you guys fast till communion when you have liturgy, or is so many hours?
Yeah, well, I mean, the traditional practice would be from midnight before.
Okay. So you say that. Yeah, so it's the same thing. Same thing for us. And the reason I think that's just so core, it's like, what a beautiful way of putting something, that if indeed communion is for healing of both soul and body, and that if I just am worthy enough through confession and preparation and fasting to get to communion, And every day I do that, and we can say, hey, that's probably like intermittent fasting. God writes the rules. And
Yeah.
now every mammalian species that does that every day of their life lives 30 to 40% longer. Like, boom. I have an entire society that if they just would follow Christ and take what is being said seriously, 90% of all disease would be gone and you'd live 40% longer. I mean, to me, that is how God like literally moves countries and cultures and kingdoms to inherit the earth.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's just wow, if only we were to do it, what that would look like.
Yes, exactly. And if we look, like, there's a great, like, there's very few, like, statistical things about Athos because, people don't go there. They're not allowed to go there, whatever, and all this stuff.
Visas, and all that sort of thing. Yeah.
Right. But if you look at the little bit of like, secular research that's done about Athos, if you look at things like diabetes, cholesterol, heart disease, stroke, all of these things that are so prevalent in our society are virtually nil on Athos, other than, genetic predispositions, right? Because we can't discount that, because they're still human, the monks.
Sure.
But what are they doing? They're fasting, but they're praying, right? And then you can't do one without the other. Like the Old Testament, unanimously, the prophets say, that fasting without prayer is an offense to Almighty God. Period.
Agree.
Period. So you have to be praying while you're fasting. And so, for instance, like, not to talk about myself, but just practical example, like we do, during Great Lent, pre-sanctified, divine liturgy, Wednesdays and Fridays. I don't eat until after pre-sanctified, like all day. Like I don't have it at my parish until 6:30 in the evening. I just won't eat all day. And then afterward, we have, we will do a fast-friendly communal meal of soup, right? Keeping that idea of the fasting all day. And then what do? You break the fast with the Eucharist, and then you celebrate the Eucharist by eating together.
Yeah.
Right after that meal, it's almost like the meal is the dessert of the divine meal, right? But in that, it's just simple, vegetable broth. And my wife is awesome with this. She's a great cook, and she really helps out. Just simple vegetable broth with vegetables, or like a lentil soup or beans or something. Right. And you would not believe how much, after not eating all day, but then receiving the Eucharist, and then how much a simple bowl of vegetable soup and maybe a little bit of bread fills you up. Like for me, like I'm ready to go conquer the world.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you feel great. And then for me, I sleep well. And then, a few hours, I feel like I need less sleep, but get better sleep in those times. And then I wake up in the morning, and, if it's a non-Eucharistic day, like a Tuesday, I find myself then even, I'll have my morning coffee because that's a non-negotiable for me.
Good black coffee.
And then, some black coffee. And then, I find myself just naturally holding off longer and longer when I start eating. And when I do eat, it's less. And then I find I just naturally make better choices because I feel better. And surprise, surprise, I like feeling good. And then on a personal, right? And then on a personal level, like I have, like, you're a doctor, so like I have major issues with irritable bowel syndrome, right? And so like I have to be careful, but I find when I'm fasting, all of that stuff is far more controllable.
Just to riff on that for a second. I mean, the average American eats 15 times a day over 11 hours. Oh, really? Sorry. Wow. Opposite. 11 times a day over 15 hours. Very extended. 11 times over 15 hours. And what people don't understand is because the intestine is a nervous system, every time you eat, you are triggering communication to the rest of your body to turn on and off all sorts of different processes. I mean, there's 30 feet of intestine. There's a reason that we don't have a bowel movement every time we eat something. Like it's all extraordinarily coordinated. And 80% of our genes are coordinated by when we look at light and when we eat. So everyone knows that feeling with jet lag. Oh, it's obvious. I went to Russia. That's a 8-9 hour difference. I'm totally out of my mind. I'm awake in the middle of the night. What's going on? Well, the next most important trigger is when you're eating. And so you can almost initiate a jet lag in your own body if you're eating unpredictably. And across too many hours. And what I find with people that I see in the emergency department, because people come in for abdominal pain, it's one of the more common causes to come to the ER. But many of them have irritable bowel disease.
Yeah.
And they really do. And a lot of it comes back to, in my opinion, having looked at the literature and studied fasting, if these people were to shorten the amount of the amount of time that they eat across the day, that it would better coordinate and allow their bodies to adjust and to adapt to that anchor. Never mind the fact that it really does speak to that brain gut axis, where if you are feeling stressed and you are nervous or fearful or anxious, etc., it does have an effect on your intestine. I mean, it's wild. That connection exists. But yeah, I really do believe that a lot of Americans struggle with irregular bowel movements, bloating, intestinal, dysphoria, let's call it, as a result of just eating too unpredictably and over too long of a period of time. And once again, it just speaks to this benefit of intermittent fasting.
Yeah, absolutely. And up two points on that. One, Callistos Ware, Metropolitan Callistos Ware, in the introduction to his Triodian that he did with Mother Mary, he beautifully says, the only reason that we find fasting to be so difficult, quote unquote, in the modern Western world is simply because we all eat too much, period.
Yeah.
That's it. That that's a byproduct of our society. And he says it's in a very neutral way too. He's not being necessarily anti-society, but we just become accustomed to eating so much that when the church tells us, okay, it's time to pull back on your eating. Oh, but I have to have this. Oh, I'll get shaky. Oh, I'll do this. And, personal health aside, because I believe to a certain extent, we need to follow what the church teaches, but also, we have to do for ourselves what we have to do. Like if you have to take certain medications, you have to eat with that, whatever. Right. We understand that, and as a pastor, I'm very compassionate to that because I do have elderly parishioners who say, well, Father, I really can't do this. Or I can't. I'm like, that's okay.
Right.
How about this? You pray this instead.
It's pastoral. It's economia, It's
exactly right. Exactly.
Absolutely.
And so that's the first thing, that we've become too accustomed to eating. And then when we do eat, it's always this very rich stuff. And then if we hear in the life of Saint Simeon, the new theologian, he must say at least in his conversations that are related through there, at least a dozen times about how the meal was boiled vegetables, and a little bread or something, and very, very simple. When we're eating, and all that kind of stuff. And then, in this, what we find is just, this idea that when we are sort of freeing ourselves from earthly attachment, right? Think about how much time and money we spend eating.
Sure.
All of a sudden, you get a lot more time. And you get to save some money too, which is a nice thing. But the time is more important, because I find when I'm, because I believe there's also a difference between your typical abstinence that you do throughout the year, and then versus something like the Nativity fast or Great Lent, when you're fasting maybe more rigorously. I find I'm more productive. I have more time to get things done. I feel like I get things quicker because I'm not preoccupied with the idea of having to, forage in the fridge for something to eat, or oh, I'm hungry again. I'm hungry, but then I'm just, Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me. And then I'll go back to what I'm doing, and then, so to this point, then I have one quick story, a practical story about this. When I was in seminary, I was blessed to have the most amazing, old sage spiritual father I could possibly have. And this is, I think, where my fascination with monasticism comes from. For a long time, he was the spiritual father at the Cheftonia Monastery in Belgium. And then he was, he had this little parish with a little house on top of a hill in the mountains of rural Westmoreland County and Pittsburgh area. It was beautiful. Wow. It was picturesque, and I would go to visit him, and we would just talk, and he was like my grandfather and all this kind of stuff. And we would sit and talk. And I told him I was struggling with some things regarding understanding the trueness of fasting and, the point and all this kind of stuff. And he says to me, Paul, here's what I want you to do. Next time you have lunch at the seminary, tomorrow, he goes, I want you to eat as much as you possibly can at lunch. And then when you think you're full and you feel good, take 3 more bites. Then I want you to go into the chapel, and I want you to pray. And so I did that. I ate plenty and I was like, all right, here we go to pray. I went to go pray and it was like the worst experience of my life.
Huh.
I'm falling asleep. I'm tired. I can't focus.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of that. And I was struggling and I couldn't, and then I felt bloated. Like you're saying, I just felt like gross and
Yeah.
all I could focus on was how terrible I felt. And I couldn't focus on Jesus Christ at all. And so the next time I went to go see him, he goes, so how'd it work out for you?
Hmm.
And I was like, terribly. And it was in that moment where I was like, yes, now I understand.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
understand. And it's hard to even explain what that means when I say, oh, now I understand. But it's like, I feel it. I can feel
right. You felt it.
Mm-hmm.
You experienced it, which is just such a key sort of like maybe that's an Eastern way of looking at things, but more of like an apprenticeship model than let's sort of sit you down and have you sort of recite something more theoretical. I mean, why not have both, really? But I do think that there's something to be said, as you mentioned, about feeling that. You will never forget that feeling. You will never forget your struggle against staying awake and trying to pray, even though having this, big meal to digest. And I'm sure your insulin would have been super high and was probably dropping your sugar. But anyway, we live in a physical world. And I always was really annoyed growing up when you kind of come across some like reductionalist who says, oh yes, they used to do this thing in the villages because when they throw the bread and the wine around the home, it would create a positive yeast and there was some health benefit. I'm like, I just feel like it's reducing the whole point of like the honeymoon, or like whatever it is, like whatever it is you're highlighting right now, like it's true, but it's we shouldn't let that eclipse what the true point is. And I think fasting kind of fits in that same way. Like, by all means, I try to emphasize the physiology, the anatomy, the medical benefit, but I don't think that should steal away from the spiritual emphasis of the project in of itself. Like the reason we're doing it is so we can pray more, so we can orient our lives towards the highest good, so we can do more good. And you've ever heard of Brian Johnson? He's this millionaire that seems to be very bored. He's trying to live forever. And interestingly, he does not believe in God. And his only philosophy is don't die. But what's so bizarre is in the 4 years or so he's been doing this, I think about a month ago, he announced that he is starting his own religion. And the religion that he's promoting is don't die. And there's some riffs on a theme. It's kind of a irony, but like he wants to live forever. And what I want to say back to him is like, no one wants to read your Instagram post for the next 160 years. Like show me why you living 30 to 40% longer or not having 90% of disease is useful. Now, granted, by all means, sometimes it's good for people to just know what the mechanisms are so good people can keep doing good things. But by all means, we're not just keeping people alive so they can watch more Netflix for the last 30 years of their life. Like right. I really do believe that that's where, if this isn't grounded in a spiritual center, then like, what's it all for anyway?
Precisely, because my wife and I always get on this. Like, if you look at the modern trends in what is considered like cool and hip, right, and all this kind of stuff, look at what they're doing. They're taking all the aspects of religion that we would have like in true Christianity. They're taking all these aspects, making them into some weird secular milieu without God in the picture, but then sort of trying to recreate God in their image, right? Which is completely crazy to me, because you're talking about, Brian Johnson here. Think about this, right? He doesn't want to die, right? Don't die.
Right.
What literally on Mount Athos, what do the monks say? What's the saying from the monks? Right. They say, if you die before you die, when you die, you don't die.
Yes.
Right? We die for this life.
Prin pathenis, then pathenis, otam pathenis. That's right.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Right. Oh, your Greek is far better than mine.
No, but it's such an epic phrase. I speak a little bit, I mean, enough, but that is a phrase you just have to put to memory forever. It's so powerful. It's so epic.
It is, and like that's the truth. That's what we're doing here. And then, like, and talking about wanting to live a long life. It's why? So we can, we can get a little more money or this or that, or we just like to live in life. It's like, Elder Safrani's beautiful prayer that I pray every single morning. It's almost like oxygen for me. When I wake up, the first thing I do is I pray this beautiful prayer he has, and it part of it says, grant me a long life so that I may offer you worthy repentance.
Mm.
And when you are to call me home, let me know so that I may prepare my soul to greet you.
Mm.
Like, you know, and
Beautiful.
that's why we want to live a long life, not for us, but so that we can get our affairs in order spiritually and offer that worthy repentance for our sins.
Mm.
But we can't say sins in a public forum because then people get all twitchy. It's like, well, you think I'm a bad person? No, I just think you're a sinner no more than me. You know, like, I don't think you're bad. It's just we all sin and we have to come to that conclusion. And then what does that bring us back to? I mean, asceticism and sacrament, the core of the church. So what's the problem?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So well said. And you know, it reminds me again, it's like, you know, they say that death entered the world so that sin would not live forever. And then my own little miniature, you know, Dr. Pete theology for Noah is that, you know, when Noah came off and the flood was over, came off the boat, so to speak, you know, the big boat, he was given the commandment that he could start eating meat.
Right.
And people prior to that time, you know, lived a very, very long time. And you almost wonder, like, was the first death, so to speak, so that sin would not live forever, but was the second sort of commandment of changing your diet so that sin would not live so long? Because I mean, up until that point, you know, you might have had 600-700 years to fortunately, unfortunately be yourself. And the world rotted as a result. So, you know, I don't necessarily know if going back to eating, you know, only plants is going to allow us to live as long as Methuselah, but, you know, it does seem to have some health benefit. And I think about, you know, these various political leaders, you know, the queen, you know, the prior queen of England, who just seemed to have lived forever. I mean, she was, you know, but I mean, how you can span a century and the impact you can have. I mean, no doubt that is, time is a very, very, very valuable thing. And it seems like the more time you have on this earth, the more that you can scale and scope up your impact for better or for worse. So you just hope that you're using that time for the right things. Otherwise, you know, a lot of bad things can happen.
Right. And like, look at some of the dates of these guys, like Elder Safrani, who I keep referencing. His dates are 1898 to 1993. Like, think about, he saw, right? I mean, he saw it all. He saw everything. And that's why his writing is so impactful, is because he's speaking in a second century way, having experienced the 20th century and all the horrors of everything, right? So that's the thing. But then also, like, you know, I referencing her again, my Baba, I mean, she was like 97 and she died. Like, you know what I mean? She was like, it's crazy, right? And I think part of it is from fasting and spirituality.
Yeah. You know, it's also, I think the experiment of throwing money and resources at bad health is over. Like, we had this idea that with enough industrialization, enough modern finance, enough technology, that we could solve all problems, keep people alive forever, so to speak, and also obfuscate, you know, all the responsibilities and duties of your family to you as you age. I mean, nursing, people talk about this wealth transfer occurring between the baby boomers and millennials. Completely false. All that money is going to go to nursing homes. It's so clear to me. All that money is going to go to healthcare, and we spend, what is it, $5 trillion a year on trying to solve problems that many times are not solvable. We just deal with symptoms. My point is this: it's like, prior to the last 100-year experiment, if you wanted to not go bankrupt as a country, not destroy the next generation with debt in your own family, you needed something that would prevent problems from starting in the first place. And to me, again, fasting is that rule. And the fact that the West and in general humankind has forgotten that practice is really to our own detriment. And we're seeing it result now in $37 trillion in debt in the United States. Baby boomers that are overwhelming our ERs and hospital systems and nursing homes, for that matter. And it's tough. In fact, I even saw this meme the other day. It was all these like baby boomers that are really elderly dancing because they just sold their home for a 20% premium to BlackRock instead of giving it to their children. But you know, historically, people used to give. There was something to be said about inheritance. Not that we were owed it per se, but it was like a way that families would survive. It didn't matter what the economy was doing, what the interest rate was. You have a home, you have
Correct.
family land, you can grow food. Like we are so civilized and disconnected from that raw reality that when suddenly the flood hits, whether that's an economic recession, COVID, whatever, we're out of our minds. We don't have the safety net in place, and it's just it's such an irony, but it's so clear. I really see the future, and it's going to be rough. I think it's really going to be rough.
Right. And we see the like the whole, I guess we can call it in a way, the dismantling of the family, but like the extended family, like for instance, like, people are scattered everywhere, right? We've left home. We've gone all over the place. We're living all our own. We don't have that safety net of family being close, but also that safety net of, like you're saying, the inheritance. And we see this affect both people personally and in the church, right? There's no longer people bequeathing a whole bunch of money to the church upon their death. And the church sees this because the reality is, yes, the church does have to pay for, parishes. They have to pay bills. They have to pay all these things to keep going, right? So that's a tangible reality. However, if we look then at something like inheritance, right? Look at the prodigal son and that parable. The implication there, when the son says to the father, give me my inheritance, right? Give it to me now. I want you to. So basically liquidate your assets and give me what is owed to me. Yeah. Really what he's saying to his father is, you're dead to me because you're only useful to me if you're dead, because I get what's owed to me. So we always don't talk about that, but that's the implication there. But then think about then how merciful that father is to accept his son back. No questions asked. When he comes back, it changes the whole aspect. So basically the son says to the father, I want you to die so I can go just do whatever I want to do. But then when the son realizes, oh man, I've done whatever I've wanted to do, and now I'm out of money, and here I am, like literally living in a pigsty, eating like nothing. Let me go back home. And the father just says, he was lost and he's now found, he was dead and now he's alive. That is like what God, how he looks at us, right? We've spent so many years in dissolute living. And then when we come back to the faith, when we come back to these authentic practices, it's like, you are alive and all of this. And he will not ask questions. If we repent and live a life in the sacraments, there will not be questions. We will receive the ring and the robe and the hug. And
well, beautifully said. What an interesting insight about, in a certain sense, how that implies that, it's almost like you want your father to be dead. And man, there's just so much I could say about that. But one thing I wanted to emphasize too, maybe a riff on a theme, there's so much in 21st century America that is a lottery ticket philosophy. And this is what I mean by this. When I was 18 at the high school graduation, there were two prompts. The one prompt was, find a job you love, you'll never work a day in your life. Yep. And two is, if you just try, you can do anything. And I understand the spirit of what they're trying to say. But what it did is it created a generation of people that thought that if work was actually work, as in it was rough and tough and difficult, that they weren't loving it. And love is euphoria, and they must not be in the right career. So let me find something else. Right. So just imagine that as a way of life, and trying to like finally find the thing you love. Like, I love my wife, I love my children. They're even tough sometimes. I'm supposed to love my job. Like, I think it's the way that we describe love as euphoria is where I find the problem, because love obviously is tolerant of many different things, including challenges. And then the second thing, that if you just work hard enough, you can be anything. I mean, the numbers say otherwise. And I'll give the most provocative example. And people talk about OnlyFans. Okay, it's this pornography site. There are people on OnlyFans making $13 million a month selling subscriptions. Obviously, it's a very sinful enterprise. Yeah. But the lie is much worse. The lie, you think what you're being sold is, if I was just morally compromised, I could be a millionaire and have a great life. The reality is the average person on OnlyFans makes $240 a month.
Wow.
So they are literally selling their soul for nothing, for pennies.
Mhm.
And in fact, I just feel like so much of that theme is expressed in sports, is expressed in politics, acting, music. I mean, name the 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 something, and you will find that if you work hard at that, it's a lottery ticket. These people who succeed are like, well, they're lottery ticket winners. They're not like real examples of a pathway that works.
Right.
And the only pathway that works is the straight and narrow pathway, which, by the way, is filled with the other son who'd never left home. In the case of the prodigal son, he was complaining to his father at the end of it, "Hey, father, you've never had killed a fatted calf and done this for me." That son was obviously living like a millionaire every day of his life. He wasn't
Right.
suffering.
He doesn't need it.
He was doing great. He was doing fantastic. And I think that is the Christian insight that we need to tell people, which is that not only is the straight and narrow actually realistic, but it's a really good time. It's
Yes.
a good time to have a wife and to have kids. In fact, I've even been told that men that are married are far more intimate regularly than the bogus the bogus bachelor who's claiming he's doing all these things. A complete lie. It's a
Right.
total lie. Like, even as a measurement of their own secular evil barometer, it sucks.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
I just feel like the whole thing is just well, that's exactly what it is. The father of lies. It's not real. It's not true.
Yeah, and it all goes back to a certain type of gluttony. All of it,
Mm.
a self-imposed, gluttonous, even like self-absorbed type of thing, right? Because it's all about look at me, or look at the things I'm doing and whatnot. But then, Mark 8, what profit does a man have if he gains the world and loses his soul in the process?
Right.
I mean, truer words from Christ have never been spoken, even though all his words are true. But
Yeah.
like, think about it, right? Exactly what all these younger people are doing. What, they're losing their souls. And maybe we're sounding a little critical, but at the same time, it's that lie that we were fed, that you can do anything. But like you're saying, that lottery mentality is simply, did the algorithm work in your favor today?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if it did, great. So basically we're seeing people, and like the danger is so ever present. We even see people who on social media think they're doing something righteous, and good and pure, but it turns out that that's not the case in the long run. And we have to be very careful, right? We are putting our faith sometimes in this algorithm system. And how can we cheat the algorithm to get views or to get this or to get that?
Yeah.
And for me, like, I try for my channel and my, what I'm doing, do I want to get my message out? Yes. And what's the message? Jesus Christ and prayer and fasting, right? That's the message. But like, I'm not concerned about my number of followers or my views or my likes. I'm just, concerned about the people who perhaps need to hear these things that weren't privy to hear them before. Maybe
there's a big difference between you having a social media presence and you leaving your wife, your parish, your children, and seeking a social media presence. And like that's again the insanity of and I'm speaking as a millennial. I'm 40 now, but
me too. Yeah, me too.
Are you?
Yep,
84, baby.
Yeah. Yep, 84.
Oh, there we go. That's a good year. But yes, it's crazy. It's crazy because in some ways, maybe another distorted way of putting this, it's like if you're willing to sacrifice everything for your desire, then but the problem is, it's like, where that began was, if you're willing to sacrifice everything for Jesus Christ, he has your back. Like, just follow that and things will work out in the proper way and order. If you replace Jesus Christ with anything else, name the noun, now suddenly your aim is not for the sun. It is for something cold and dark and far away, and it's a lonely path. And anyway, like I said, I just feel like it's a message that just needs to be reined in, because last time I checked, I think the average high school student wants to be a social media star. They don't want to be astronauts. They don't want to be docs. They don't want to be engineers. They and who's
don't want to be priests, right?
They don't want to be priests. And so, like, who has dominion of the future? And we're not going to become expert at anything just being a social media star and a talking head with no content to share. But it's very interesting times.
Yes, and one thing I would like to share in regard to this, we don't live in a perfect world, and we don't, and some things won't be perfect, but you find these weird blessings in these things. Like, so for instance, like you can still live this life and like have fun is what I'm trying to get at. Like it doesn't, I don't want to come across as we're sounding like these weird, like stuffy guys, right, that are talking about this. Like, for instance, I want to tell you a quick story. It's a little self-referential, but I mean, I'm just sharing my experience.
No, that's why I'm interviewing. I love it. Please tell me.
So last week, my daughter, she sings. So our children are 11 and 8. Okay. And my wife and I both, we have music backgrounds, right? So our family's like very musical and all of this stuff and everything. And I probably should point out too, my name there, that's my wife's name. I don't like identify as Alyssa. So, yeah, I don't identify as Alyssa West. Okay. But we'll just keep that there. I'm using her computer today. So anyway,
no problem.
So last Friday, my daughter, she sings in the choir in her middle school, and they were singing the national anthem at a Wings lacrosse game, which is a local Philadelphia professional lacrosse team. And they were at the Wells Fargo Center down in Philly by like where the Eagles play and all that kind of fun stuff and everything. So this was like huge for her. I couldn't go because I had pre-sanctified at the parish. So I kind of, gave her like, yes, of course you can go. The Lord understands. You come to so many other things.
Sure.
You can go. And both the kids, because one of the things we did for them specifically during the fast here is like no candy, period. Like you guys eat way too much candy. You're just not, no candy, no sweets,
even though it's fasting. Yes, I totally get it. I totally get been
none
there.
of that. And right. And so that kind of stuff. And, very, very, trying to make sure that we're very, very nurturing with the whole like Wednesday, Friday kind of thing of the increased abstinence on those days. And just being generally like one rule we have as a family is during the fast, we just never go out to eat, period. Like that's our family thing. Like we just do not do it. No eating out, except for, I should say this, we always have a tradition that if Annunciation falls on the fast after Divine Liturgy in the evening, we do order pizza. That's our one. It's become a tradition because it's always just such a busy day, like 2 days with the double Vespers and all that. Anyway, so we, so what they were concerned about, which I thought was adorable, was like, well, are we allowed to enjoy ourselves? Like, is there going to be a concession stand? Is there going to be this or that? And we were like, yeah, you're 11 and 8. Yeah. Like, it's okay. Right. So they're there and whatever. And, of course, it's your typical ballpark food type stuff, burgers, chicken fingers, all this kind of stuff, fries. My wife told me that our 8-year-old son, she goes, you would have been so proud of him. Unprompted. He loves chicken fingers. He picked up the chicken fingers and the fries. She said he put it on his tray and he looked at it. He put it back and took the mozzarella sticks because he knew it was Friday. Like, those are the little things you see. And what is it? Self-control. Nobody told him to do that. He didn't do it. Right. So you're teaching your children these good habits now, but like never did I say to him once, you are learning self-control, son, and you're going to learn how to keep yourself in check and you're going to make decisions. And like, sure, mozzarella sticks, not healthy necessarily, but you know what I mean? It's, you know what I'm saying? You have an 8-year-old boy who, was in heaven, who, I can get anything I want. It's going to cost an arm and a leg, but I don't have to worry about that. Mom's got it covered, and he chooses something that he, was a right choice. And it's like amazing.
The beauty of that moment is that those are the types of first of all, it was a visceral experience, right? I'm sure he was hungry. I'm sure he was salivating. I'm sure he was deep in sort of this moment of conflict that he had a choice and he made the right choice. But in my mind, that is the territory he's covering now as an 8-year-old, so that at 20 he doesn't start using heroin,
right?
So that at 25, when he's considering getting married to the wrong lady, he's saying, you know what, I know I have this feeling for her, but there's something else that feels wrong, and I need to wait for the right spouse. Like these are all little practice sample sets for principles and feelings that they've worked out now, so that in the future they prevent a whole life of suffering.
Mhm.
And I've never met an addict that fasts. Like
Mhm.
I have to say, like, if people I know from my own childhood, my network, etc., people who fast and have learned those parts and points and principles through a visceral core experience like fasting, they don't get involved in these other problems. And
Mhm.
it's not to say that they're strong so they fast. No, no, no. They fasted so they could become strong. And
Exactly.
they made small micro mistakes times 50, and at 10 they solved something that maybe someone else later on in life learned at 30 through some more cerebral practice in a book, an insight in a film, whatever. But why waste the time? Why
Right.
waste the time?
Mhm.
And no, it's a great example, and God bless him. And I think that's it's a beautiful thing that he's even considering those thoughts. I mean, a lot of kids, they don't even have the template, the standard to even compare something to. You know, thank God that he's in a family where that is being emphasized. And by the way, I'm one of 5 sons. My father was a priest. He was an eye surgeon. He was a priest.
Oh, wow.
So you know, just to say, like, you know, we also had this mandate, or just sort of this way of life of fasting during periods of the year where we got to test drive some of those principles. But that's a wonderful story. It's a beautiful story. God bless him.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and it is a blessing. And then what it does for me as the parent, that motivates me. Like you said, like that, it's not the fasting that makes me stronger, quote unquote. Seeing that then makes me stronger and gives me
Mhm.
more motivation to continue my personal asceticism, because it's like,
Yes.
wow, through my sacrifice, like I don't talk to him about this very much, but he sees me,
Mhm.
right? He sees my prayer. He sees my fasting. And even Elder Safrani writes about this, that like you don't, and I think Elder Paisios as well, like you don't ram it down your child's throat.
Yes.
You live the life and then they follow you because you
Yeah.
bring them along. And even if, like, you know, we see some families on social media, how we're like, they've got the icon corner and they're all praying and the kids are incensing and all
Uh-huh.
this, and they're playing the dramatic music and it looks like this picturesque thing. And
Uh-huh.
then we get that sadness of, oh man, I must be doing something wrong if my family doesn't look like that.
Uh-huh.
You literally have Athonite monks telling married people that, listen, if you're just praying, like you as the individual, the mother, the father, if you yourself are just praying, your children see that. But also the grace that you have when you're praying, that gets imbued on your whole family.
Hmm.
And then that grace moves them to pray. So we all don't have to look the same. And that's something I often tell my families is, don't necessarily look to those picturesque images we see of these families, you know, praying like that. Like every family's different, just like every monastery is different. And your home
Mhm.
is a monastery. And, you know, as the man, as the husband, you're sort of, you know, you're the head of that monastery.
Yeah,
And
like an abbot.
you know,
Yeah.
right, you're like the abbot of that thing. But you know, we can also see, even like, let's say you have a single mother for whatever reason, if there was, you
Mhm.
know, something in the marriage or the husband passed away early, the mother is also the abbess
Mhm.
of that monastery. And that's where we start. And that's why I think why my whole thing is like, you know, my YouTube channel is building Athos in our hearts, because wherever we are, if we have Athos in our hearts,
Hmm.
that's where we're living the angelic life as best as possible. And that's in our homes. And then we
Beautiful.
view the home as like this sort of like a little bit of like a skeet, where we have our own little hut, you know, our own little cell we're living
Yeah.
in during the week. And then Sundays, holy days, we all come together in the temple, in the church as a community. But then that community doesn't end when we leave after liturgy. You take that home with you and you keep living that idiorhythmic lifestyle, and then you go back and you're constantly. So the idea of community grows, the idea of support grows, and then all of a sudden we find ourselves living like the apostles, right?
Mm.
Check out Acts 2:44-47. And that's it. That's what we need to strive for in this modern age. And we can do it, you know, and we can be this testament to the Lord. And ultimately, you know, we worry about like church attendance and people falling away from the church and all this. And what can we do? You know, and the funny thing is, it's not necessarily goofy Instagram posts or maybe flashy signs or great presence on social media. If we look at Acts chapter 2, verse 47, says, and the Lord added to their number day by day those who are being saved, right? The Lord adds to their number, because what people see, what do they see you doing? They see you praying. They see you fasting. They see you sacrificing, living a communal life, but they see how happy you are in that. They see a certain peace. They feel something. And what is that peace? That peace is the light of Christ, the uncreated light we hear about in John 1. And we start to live that, and that light illumines our bodies and it takes us over. And whether we know it or not, people see that and they're drawn into it. And they're not drawn into the individual. They're drawn to Jesus Christ. And it's the Lord who helps us do all this. And we can't get around it.
No, beautifully said. And I think the role for your channel and social media and priests getting online, and of course, people are calling it the orthoverse and various things, things. But the reality is just like many families in America don't have a father or a mother, or there's some complication, your son has an opportunity to see you and how you live, and it's subtle, but he absorbs that over time. The reality is that much of secular America does not have that. In fact, I think it's something like 25% of all households are single mother, usually households.
Yeah.
And but the world average is 7%. So
right.
Sad that it's even 7%, but it's particularly problematic. I think it's 70+% if you're an African American U.S. citizen.
Sure.
So in my mind, the goal, oftentimes through these efforts online, is to get some awareness in front of people that don't have those examples embedded in their communities. Because the reality is the United States is not an Orthodox Christian or Greek Catholic society. And what's also interesting too, it's like, I think that the two best predictors of never becoming impoverished is that if you have a high school degree and if you're married. I mean, the social engineering that God has engineered into the world is you don't have to have an IQ of 160. You don't have to be 6'5". You don't have to be 3 PhDs. You just need basic education and a married, loving spouse, and you'll be okay. But what's crazy in America, in a place as wealthy and as successful in many measurements in the United States, is that that institution, at least marriage, is just so under threat. And less and less people are getting married, and many people are, if they're having children at all, are certainly not having it with two parents in the home. And again, I don't think any one of us Orthodox Christians, Greek Catholics, is saying problems and mistakes and things don't happen. Like, life happens.
Oh, absolutely.
But let's at least agree on the goal. Like, what is the goal? And I think what America has done is we've tried to get rid of all goals. We've said, hey, well, the goals are racist, or goals are sexist, or goals are too oppressive. And it's like, goodness gracious, people, you do not understand what you're signing up for right now.
Right. Absolutely. And you're talking about the whole, the social construct that God has engineered for us, right? And the idea that fasting brings us back to Adam and Eve in the garden, and all this. But think about pre-fall. What does God say to Adam and Eve, right? Be fruitful, multiply, have dominion over the earth. What does that actually mean? Well, take care of what I've given you, but also, like you're saying, you have to learn what's around you. You have to have an education, right? High school education. Have a cursory idea of your surroundings, right?
Right.
Cursory idea of your surroundings. And then what else? Basically, not living is not fit for man to be alone, right? And so then we have the creation of Eve. And then what does Adam say? He says, alas, look, this is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man, right? And then there's a beautiful parenthetical note. And this is why a man leaves his mother and father and cleaves to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, right? You're living for one another. So there you have your education, and you have your marriage, your unity in marriage. And then what do we see? Pre-fall, Adam says, oh, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, what a gift. And then literally in Genesis 3, the next chapter, you turn the page, and when God says, who told you you were naked,
Mm-hmm.
Adam. What does he say? He says, that woman you gave me made me eat the fruit, right? So she goes from bone of his bone and flesh of his flesh to that woman you gave me. So he takes all responsibility off himself, not only blames Eve, but
Right.
blames God for giving him that woman in the first place.
Yeah.
There we go. Like that's it. We see perfection, and then we see what happens when sin enters the picture. But when sin enters the picture and we are not willing to admit our own sin, right? When we're not willing to confess it before God, we're going to blame somebody else. We're going to blame God for our misfortunes, right? And it's like, well, sometimes misfortunes are a sort of just a reason because of circumstance, right? There's circumstantial things that happen in life,
right?
You know, like nobody ever did anything to deserve to get hit by a drunk driver. You know what I mean? That's an unfortunate thing. But what is it rooted in? Sin, ultimately, and so we don't ask for these things to happen. And then that answers the question when people are like, well, you believe in that spaghetti monster sky fairy thing. How can you believe in a good and loving God who lets, children die, right? And there's children cancer and miscarriages and all this kind of stuff. It's like, well, that's not how this all works,
Yeah. Well, from a doc's perspective and from the studies I've done and the experiences I've had, I'm going to say that 90% of all human tragedy is self-inflicted.
Exactly.
And so we gotta own up the first 90% before we can start criticizing, even coming to that question of why it's such a funny thing, actually, that in some way we're saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe that God would allow X, Y, and Z to occur when we're responsible for the first 90%. And for that matter, imagine this, if we could get rid of 90% of healthcare spending, then couldn't we, in theory, then send those resources and support to that very difficult 10% rarity, and what would that look like, and then everything, and it's again, if we could take Christianity to scale, and really take it seriously, what diseases could we eliminate? What problems could we solve? How long would we live? Like the heaven on earth, in some ways, like the reason that we don't have it is because human beings refuse to be like Christ. And that scales up to a gigantic problem that we're seeing evidence of right now, statistically, culturally, religiously. Just name it, and it's manifested. It really is.
Oh, absolutely. And not to be too self-serving, but part of my priestly ministry, I work part-time as a hospital chaplain. But I work. I'll drop the name. I work at the Matheny Medical and Educational Center in Peapack, New Jersey. And this is a residential facility for children and adults with medically complex physical and developmental disabilities. Right? I just sounded like a brochure there. So nice, right?
Oh, good, great.
Yeah. And so all the people there, so the residential facility, and they have 5 group homes and an adult day facility. I think I see like 145 people throughout my day, not every day, but throughout my chaplaincy. And they have a facility in Peapack, New Jersey, with 101 beds. And every single person in there, you're looking at diagnoses of like CP, spina bifida, chromosomal abnormalities, Lesch-Nyhan disease, all that kinds of like Fragile X, Angelman syndrome, all these diagnoses. And that's that 10% you're talking about, right?
Yes.
These people who there was nothing that was self-inflicted.
Right.
It was, and these people are not only some of the most fragile people on the face of the planet, they're some of the most sincere, some of the most genuine, and some of the most beautiful people I've ever met. So a lot of times I feel like, I joke and I tell them and they laugh, they do chaplaincy for me. I don't go to, I'm not their chaplain, they're my chaplain sometimes, but it's just right. You see that 10% of that population and what we can really do for people like that. But also I think it just shows, like you're saying, the broader scope of Christianity and how that just comes alive when we take ourselves out of ourselves, admit our own faults, our own shortcomings, and then try to improve.
Well, and God bless what you do there, because I know how critical it is, and I know how foreign the discussion of death and suffering is to 21st century society. And that, you know, a lot of people try to talk in hyperbole about euthanasia and whatever, but really what the question is what does a good death look like? And I'm not saying like what's the good medication to give with death. No.
Right,
I'm saying is people, like, I have 95-year-olds that have never been asked, do you want heroic measures? Do you want CPR? Do you want intubation, to be on a ventilator? Like, no one's asking them these questions, and they're wondering if they have lung cancer at 95, and it's like tragic. And it's just, it's not to say we should give up. It's not to say that we should fight against futility, but it's just to say is that modern man has no point of reference whatsoever when it comes to the topic of death. And the only place you find that is within the church. And so I find that when you have spiritual leaders, and not just like you know, Jackie from 7th Street who's coming over after 3 months of feeling inspired by the Spirit, but I'm talking about people who have the humility to draw on the experience of a 2,000-year-old tradition that has had bumps and bruises and has sorted things out and has found saints and heroes that teach us how to manage these tough moments, that they can draw on those experiences and share something like wisdom and something peaceful to these people in their struggles. And so, God bless your efforts, Father. I think it's we need so much more of that, because we don't have any tools whatsoever I mean, I can share facts with people. I can share them prognosis. I can give them a sense of timeline from their pancreatic cancer. They got 3 months to go, but no one tells them what they should be doing until then, and what's reasonable and what's not. And so, it's just it's wonderful, Father. I really appreciate the conversation. I'm soaking it all up, and I'm so glad I found an ally in Pennsylvania.
Absolutely,
of all places, and I really like the work that you have online. I think you're bringing home this point about bringing Athos into our hearts and our homes makes sense. I think it's awesome that you reference a place that also has so much history and so much gravity to it. And I feel like we could just riff on points for a long time here. We talked a little bit about fasting. We talked a little about Lent. We talked a little bit about all sorts of things regarding society and how these things interconnect. Where can people find more about you, Father?
Yes. Okay. Well, you can find more about me Instagram at @building_Athos, or on YouTube. It's the handle is @building_Athos, and the name of the channel is Building Athos in Our Hearts. And if you happen to be in the Philly metro area, you can come to Our Lady of Perpetual Help Byzantine Catholic Church in Levittown, Pennsylvania, and you can find me there. And also we have our website is olphbizpa.org. So you can find us there. And that's where I'm at.
Do you guys have Vespers on Saturday nights?
We do, yes, 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock. Okay, yeah, man. You know what? I hope before this year runs out, I hope to show up there one time for a Vespers at least.
Yes, absolutely. Shoot me a message, and then we'll gladly welcome you.